Welcome back to another podcast, everybody. It is another Tuesday morning. Time to talk some more hunting. And this week, we are talking about late season whitetail hunting. One of my favorite hunts of the year. I know it seems like we say that a lot, but I'd put whitetail in the October season right up there next to November whitetail hunting. But before we do that, we're going to jump in and thank some of our partners with this podcast that just make this whole thing possible. We're so thankful to. First off, being Onyx Hunt. This is just an awesome online mapping software. It's on your phone. It's on the desktop. And one thing I like with Onyx is under the layers, you can turn off roadless areas, or turn on roadless areas, I should say. And it'll show you on maps areas that are a certain distance away from roads. So if you're really trying to get out there away from people, it's always a good thing to look at. And it's not too much fun when you hike in somewhere and put a lot of effort in, and you get in there and you realize someone across the basin is driving in on their truck. So
that's right.
It's just a nice little thing to look at.
That's one of my favorite features. In fact, it's always on my Onyx Hunt app.
There you go.
Another one that we want to thank is Vortex Optics. I love Vortex Optics. We believe in the products. We believe in the people. It's a great company. If you're in the market right now to buy optics, I highly recommend them. If you shop at eurooptic.com, you can use code SY10 to save you some cash on all Vortex Optics products, specifically on that website. One of the products I love is the Triumph binoculars. It's $100, and they are just the perfect pair of entry-level binoculars, or the binoculars that you kind of just leave in your truck.
Those are my truck binos.
Exactly.
They always are in my they are always in my truck.
They're my favorite.
And lastly, we'd like to thank Tacticam. Their Reveal cell cam line are just top-notch cell cameras. Obviously, with cell cameras, they're the coolest things. You don't have to go in and mess a place up, going in and changing batteries and SD cards and leaving your scent around, especially with areas that are really finicky and sensitive to pressure, like a lot of places are around this part of the state. You go in with your solar panel and your cell camera, and they have incredible cell coverage. You can always check it on their website, but really great cell coverage. Get them in a lot of places, and just kind of take your scouting to the next level.
That's right.
But now it's time for Smong's undoubtedly favorite part of this podcast. I enjoy it as well. He gets a kick out of it. And we're going to do Trivia Duel.
The reason why I love this is because this is the only time we actually learn something.
Except when we do things wrong out in the field.
Yes.
Then we learn the hard lessons. These are the easy lessons.
These are just the straight to the point where everybody loves. We tend to lag throughout the podcast. Here's my Trivia Duel question for you for the week.
Okay.
How many species of grouse are in North America? Do you want to take a stab, or do you want multiple choice?
I'll take a stab.
Okay.
I'm going to go with 5 species.
Okay. Do you want to name them? Or are you just going to go
I'm going to go with blue grouse.
Okay.
Ruffed grouse.
Okay.
Sage grouse. I kind of want to say there's a forest grouse, although I'm not sure, and I'm given one to the unknown, just assuming there's one more that I have no idea. I could be completely off.
So, I mean, you had some names that were spot on. Okay, it's not like they were not there or something, but there are 12
Holy cow
species of grouse in North America. And according to with how they've classified it, ptarmigan are considered a grouse.
Interesting.
So
a white grouse. A snow grouse.
Exactly. So you said it. So we'll start with what you called. So the forest grouse is a species. And underneath the species of forest grouse, there are the subspecies, which you've named.
Okay.
So forest grouse is the species. And underneath that, it's a spruce grouse. Then there's a ruffed grouse. And then up until only in the recent history did we find out that the blue grouse is actually 2 completely separate species. So here in Washington, the blue grouse used to just be one blue grouse. But biologists have now found out that the blue grouse is actually 2 distinct different species.
Huh.
So there's the sooty grouse, and then there's a dusky grouse. The dusky grouse lives in eastern Washington. The sooty grouse is on the west side of Washington.
Interesting.
So under the forest grouse, there's 4. The other one is a sage grouse.
Yeah.
And underneath the sage grouse, there are 2 subspecies. There's the greater sage grouse, and there's the Gunnison sage grouse. The next species is the prairie grouse. One example is a sharp-tailed grouse. And underneath the sharp-tailed grouse, there's like a list of them, which I'm not going to name. And then the other prairie grouse is the greater prairie chicken.
The greater prairie chicken.
Yes, and then underneath those, there's 2 subspecies, which one of them is a heath hen, which those are extinct. And then under ptarmigan, you've got 3. You've got the rock ptarmigan, the willow ptarmigan, and the white-tailed ptarmigan. So it's quite a bit of a list there, and it's all over the place. But I guess all you need to know is there's 12 species of grouse in North America.
Way off. But that's good to know. Again, we learn something.
Yeah, and in
every
Washington,
week.
We got 6 species of them, but we can only hunt 4, which is the sooty/dusky grouse, aka a blue grouse, and a ruffed and a spruce.
Huh.
So we can hunt 4 in Washington.
Very cool. What I have for you here. Who are regarded to commonly as either the father or fathers of bow hunting? Is it A, Fred Bear, B, Saxon Pope and Arthur Young, C, Chuck Adams and Ted Nugent, or D, Fred Eichler?
A, Fred Bear.
Locked in?
Locked in.
Actually, it's funny. If you guys tuned into last week about the elk, my trivia duel was about Boone and Crockett, and we joked about having Pope and Young. This came up completely independently of that discussion. But Dr. Saxon Pope was a surgeon and a medical instructor. Arthur Young was a newspaper man. In the early 1900s, they became friends with a man named Ishi, who is one of the last known living members of the Yana tribe out of California, a Native American tribe. Ishi, this Native American, introduced them to how he fashioned bows, arrowheads, and arrows, and taught them how to spot and stalk bow hunt. Then in 1923, Saxon Pope published a book called Hunting with the Bow and Arrow, which is attributed to introducing most of modern Americans to bow hunting as a recreational activity. And so because of that, Pope and Young are commonly known as the fathers of bow hunting.
So that was a very long way to say I got it wrong. Well, I've always just assumed Fred Bear was his name, his nickname.
My Google search may or may not have been, is Fred Bear the father of bow hunting?
That's
so,
funny.
We're in the same boat there.
Well, I guess that just goes to show how much we know about archery, which is not a lot. Folks, if you guys are trying to learn about archery, this is not the podcast. We're just here to show how dumb we are. That's what we're here to do.
And bring on guys like Clayton and Colton Vining who do know about archery, because we can let them talk.
Occasionally, we do grab people who know how to bow hunt. But until then, we just got to kind of ride the wave until we get them. But this week, late season whitetail. Now, this is a broad topic. And even though here in Washington, at least in this region, the Northeast region, we do have a general late season tag, we're going to kind of keep it a little bit more broad, because this is honestly a season that is pretty popular and pretty readily available across multiple Western states. So it's not just Washington that has a late season hunt, and it's not just this region. In fact, there's essentially almost statewide that you may have an opportunity to hunt whitetails during the late season, which is often nicknamed the rut. Some of those places you just got to draw a tag, but really it's just a focus of why you should hunt whitetails in November. Now, that might seem very obvious to a lot of people who have hunted before. Obviously, it's the rut. But what does that actually mean? And why do people talk so highly about a rut whitetail hunt versus how we did 2 weeks ago when we talked about the general season October? I mean, there's ample opportunity in October. So for somebody who may only have like a week to take off for the season, they might be like, do I take it off in October or do I take it off in November? Now, there's pros and cons to both. I mean, Nate and I, we did a pretty thorough dive into the pros and cons of hunting whitetail during the October, which is often just the general rifle season. But you do have an opportunity to still kill them in multiple states in November. In fact, that's when most people, I would say, target actually whitetails.
Mm-hmm.
Now, here in Washington, this is basically where I grew up, the Northeast region. We have a general late season tag, meaning it's the same deer tag that you buy that you hunted in October. And if you just did not fill that tag in October, that tag simply transfers over and they can still hunt whitetail deer with that same very tag.
With the same weapon that you bought that tag under for
Yes,
Washington.
Exactly. So in Washington, you got to choose your weapon. So if you bought a rifle tag, then you can hunt both deer during the rifle general season in October. And if you didn't tag one there, then you can go into the late general rifle season in whitetail. And that goes for both muzzleloader and archery. You just have to keep your weapon specific season in play. But with that said, the most basic way to put it is November, you simply get to hunt whitetail deer either before the rut, during the rut, or after the rut. And the reason why I don't just specify one is because it honestly fluctuates from year to year. Some years the rut comes early, some year the rut hits right on time, and some years the rut's a little bit late.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, there's really I don't really contribute it to some specific environmental aspect. Sometimes it's just about the individual doe.
Mm-hmm.
Like some does, they go in heat sooner than the others. Some does come into heat really late. And so that's why it's hard to say, oh, this is the rut. In Washington, in this general season, which is usually open about November 9th through the 19th, usually that's a pre-rut hunt. The rut is considered like the 20th through the 25th. That's like peak rut. In Washington fashion, we always get the season right before it gets to the good stuff.
Yeah, which that true rut hunt in Washington, we have these things, if you're not from Washington, called quality tags. There are special permits, our controlled hunts, whatever you want to call it, the ones we apply for with points. And there are quality whitetail tags in Washington, which offer an additional, usually 4 to 5 days tacked on to the end of normal season. So if you were to draw a quality hunt, you can hunt your normal season and then your 4 to 5 days at the end.
At least here in the Northeast region, because again, we have the general November 9th through the 19th. Other regions of Washington where you don't have this general late season for whitetail, if you draw most of those late whitetail tags, you have to draw through the special permit application process. Most of those late season whitetail buck permits are under the buck deer category. Mm-hmm. A lot of times when you start getting outside of this Northeast region, like let's say you go to North Central Washington or down to the Southeast Washington, the quality tags that you get are mule deer tags. Mm-hmm. And I'll go even one step further. The quality tags are any deer actually. But the buck deer is specifically for whitetail. So if you draw a quality deer tag, you can shoot either species. It doesn't really specify. It just says any buck or whatever the regulations might be. Obviously, double check it. But I'm speaking from a very broad sense here. But with that said, why should you hunt whitetails in November?
Well, I think what we should start to do is just tell a little story about hunting whitetail in November.
And then I think at the end of that story, they will know why you should hunt it.
Yeah, I think by the end of that story, it might be explanatory to some people why we like to hunt deer in November, whitetails. And maybe for some, it's their cue to, oh, right, I want to hunt October deer. I don't want to hunt November deer. Because those seasons, although they're only separated by a month, offer vastly different experiences in our region, at least. Most of the time, yeah. Yes. There are the outliers. So we're going to jump back to 2022. If you guys have been listening around to the podcast, especially these white-tailed deer ones, you might have heard us mention or talk about this deer that we call Octo. And so this story, although it has a very dismal ending, I'll spoil you right now, I missed a beautiful 5x5 buck. The story of the hunt is really something. And this is kind of the birthplace of my last 4 years of chasing this deer. So 2022 general season, early season, should be said, was not fruitful because we were hunting late season. And this was a spot that we refer to as the 900. It just kind of has developed over the years. That's what we call to it. So if you hear in the 900, Octo, synonymous, is in the same location.
Octo lives in the 900.
Octo lives in the 900. So we had found this spot. I had sent Samong a pin of this drainage in early season. And like he had said a couple podcasts ago, we only had a morning to go in there. And we went in there, saw plenty of deer numbers early season, nothing that was really piquing our interest. And you had you already filled your deer tag this year?
Mm-hmm.
You had already filled it.
Yep.
So it was just me as the tag holder. And so there was nothing that piqued my interest. We saw some little forkies, little 1x2s, things like that. And I hunted through the rest of the early season. Nothing came of it. Came into late season, and I had picked, with my time off from work, I had picked like the last 5 days of season to hunt. And so I had gone out with my wife the first couple days, and it was cold with a little bit of snow, but it was residual snow. It was really icy snow, and so it was extremely loud walking. There was probably only 4 to 5 inches of snow on the ground in this place that I hunt, and it was moderately cold. It was in like the high 20s in the early morning hours to like mid 30s during the daytime hours. So my wife and I hunted a basin adjacent to the 900 basin, and we didn't see too much. Deer activity was kind of slow. It was really sunny out, and so we kind of just had a slow hunt. My wife tapped out after a day or two, so it was on to me, and Samong joined me, and I kind of told him what I was hoping to plan here. I wanted to get up early, hike into this spot, and the couple nights that happened in between, there was quite a bit of snow. We got hit with, well, in the lower regions, it was only a couple inches, but up where we were by the head of this basin, it turned out to be like knee depth or a little more. It was a good bit of snow. And so morning one of Samong and I's hunt, we get up and it's cold. It was probably mid-teens. And we hike in the dark. It was a pretty full moon, and so I actually really distinctly remember with the snow and the moon, we didn't use headlamps, even though it was quote-unquote pitch black out. Like, it was the middle of the night. It had not a crack of daylight yet, but we didn't need headlamps, which was really cool. We were hiking under the moonlight with the snow reflecting. It was very pretty. It was very cold, and we were covering other people's boot tracks who had been in the day before when we hadn't, and then we passed the end of those boot tracks and hiked more up this basin, about another couple miles. And that day we hunted, and I don't think we saw a whole lot.
No, this was the first time where we worked into that basin from this particular direction.
Mm-hmm.
In October, we had come in essentially from up over and top. This time we're going from the bottom, which is it's gradual, but it's just a way farther hike.
Mm-hmm.
But because of the snow conditions, we couldn't come in back from up top because our truck wouldn't have made it.
Yeah.
And so we had no option but to come from the bottom. And the thing I was kind of telling Nate during general season is you always want to get high ground, especially when you're hunting those clear cuts, because when you're up high, you see better. But because we had no option, we kind of have to sneak our way through the valley, essentially. We just didn't really see a lot. I mean, we bumped a lot of deer.
Mm-hmm.
I remember distinctly.
It was so loud.
Yeah, like 200 yards. No, maybe like half a mile from the truck. We saw some does running across down in this little open creek bottom. And then we hiked another mile and a half or so. And then we popped down to this little field. I remember I stood there. I was like, man, this place looks awesome for deer. We stand there for like 5 minutes. Don't see anything. Nate takes like 10 steps. I look back at the hill and I just see three white flags waving. I'm like, great. I knew there were deer in here. So they go up and over. And so we eventually make our way over there. And again, we haven't seen anything. We don't really know the lay of the land. And so I remember Nate and I, we got on X and we're just like, let's just go up to this little point right here. Because from this point, it looks like we can just kind of have an overview of this little valley that we might want to hunt.
Yeah, so Samong kind of laid out here a picture of where we're at in this basin, and we were kind of just, because we hadn't been in there before, we were kind of using it as a feel-out day for the basin. So we hike up to this glassing spot, and I think it was Samong pretty soon into the morning.
We got up to this thing, I mean, it's probably like 11. I remember the sun was high. This was a super sunny day. It's to the point where when you have snow on the ground and there's sun and you don't have sunglasses on, it hurts your eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember we're sitting there, and it's cold. It's like it's sunny, but it's freezing.
Yeah.
And so Nate and I, we kind of dig ourselves a little spot in the snow, and we're sitting essentially like when you sit down, when you dig out a hole, like the snow is like almost up to your shoulder. Like we were deep in the snow. And so from that point, we're essentially overlooking 2 little basins, but it's all clear cut. And we're sitting there. Not too long, I spot a doe. She's just like sunbathing up on this ridge, and then another 20 minutes go by. I look in the middle of the clear cut, and I don't know where these deer came from. I don't know if they were there, but I spot this buck, and he is like nose to tail on this doe.
Yeah.
And I look at him, and prior to going to this hunt, I always ask Nate, like, what's your expectations? Like, what are you trying to shoot? And Nate was just like, honestly, anything remotely not a spike. And I'm like, that's fine. And so I put the binos on him. I spot him. He's like a little 3x4. He's like a fork on one side with an eye guard and just like a very small 4 on the other side. And I glass him. He's like 600 yards there, chilling in open clear cut. And I asked Nate, like, do you want this guy? And obviously Nate was like, yeah, I'd love to put a stock on this guy. So long story short, we basically make a loop. And because it's so open, we had to like backtrack, get way back in, and then come up the adjacent ridge to where he's on. But again, because it's so loud with the snow, we didn't even get to our spot. I look back across the clear cut, and I just see all these deer booking it. And I'm like, well, there goes these deer. So to fast forward, we sat there all day waiting for him. Mm-hmm. We saw the world's smallest 2-point at 250 yards. And I'm like, Nate, you said you wanted a 2-point, and he's a 2-point. But obviously, he was like a spike who just had 2 little eye guards. And so we passed him. Last light, Mini Houdini, which is what we nicknamed this little 3x4, he comes back out from the timber. We try to put a stock on him, but he just disappeared back into the timber. I was supposed to go home after that. Do you remember that? So I had an Oregon elk tag, and so I had to drive like 8 hours to that spot. And so we were hunting. So just imagine that was like Thursday. I was going to use Friday to drive from Spokane all the way down to Oregon and then meet my brother at elk camp, and then we were going to hunt Saturday. And then we get back to Nate's house, and Nate's like, dude, what do I got to do to make you hunt another day with me? Like, I want to go back in that base. I want to go kill that buck because I feel like we can kill that buck. And I was like, honestly, like, I can make it happen. Like, I can just, drive overnight and go straight to camp and hunt the morning. And so he convinced me. And so day 2 comes around, and
so day 2, we crashed up at my place here, and it got really cold over that night. In fact, I remember pulling up in the truck. Well, we got out, and the truck had a hard time starting that morning, which is never a good sign. And
and it's a Toyota, so it's cold.
That's right. And so we got out there, and when we park in at our spot at the gate, the truck said 7 degrees. And I was like, oh boy, here we go.
I remember I looked at Nate, and I was like, are you ready? And we both looked at each other, and we were just like, no.
No. So we sat in the truck a few minutes in the pitch black with the 7 degrees on the screen, contemplating what we were going to do, even though we knew eventually we were going to get out. And so we kind of pile on our gear in the heat of the truck, and we start hiking. And it's a pretty decent hike uphill the whole way into the spot.
It's not like anything crazy, but it's just constant.
It's just constant.
Uphill.
And so by the time we got about a half mile in, we were both sweating because we had put on every layer, all the puffies, all that stuff. So we stopped, we stripped stuff off, and then we kept hiking. We go slow. We had a bit of a quieter entry because we actually got to follow our boot tracks from the prior day.
And it was so nice not having to make new footprints.
Yeah, it was really nice not having to break new trail. And because, there was some other hunters' boot tracks a little ways in there, which kind of made a boot path. But then once it was just Samong and I's, I mean, it was like mid-shin up to knee in some spots for every single step.
It was over the gator.
Yeah. And so we hike in, and we had gone to a couple different glassing knobs on the first day, and we picked the one that we wanted, felt like we had best visibility on from the second day. We get up there, and Smong's like, you know what we're going to do? We're going to do what my uncle does, and we're going to make a stump fire. I was like, we're going to do what now? And he's like, we're going to make a stump fire. That's going to make all the difference in the world.
And I remember Nate gave me that look.
I was like, dude, there's like 2 to 3 feet of snow on everything around here. What do you mean we're going to make a fire? But Samong worked his Asian magic and made a stump fire. And which for those of you who don't know, it's basically building a fire, but you build it around a dead stump.
Yeah.
So that instead of going and collecting all these little twigs and branches in late season when everything's already covered in snow, you have a fuel source that the fire continues to work on.
It's a great survival tool. But before we even got there, so imagine that, I guess, here's the basin. Nate and I, we were glassing from the south side, and from the south side, you had 3 ridges in front of you. We saw Mini Houdini in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
We worked our way to the far right one, looking into the middle where he was. And so we were like, that's the buck we're going to go after. We last seen him on that ridge. We're going to go see on this right one. And this right one from the middle is, the farthest is like 500 yards. But on average, your shot's like 300 yards.
Yep.
And so before we even got to the fire, we were like, we're going to sit there and not make a sound.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember we sat there, and it is cold.
We each actually had a cup of like 7 a.m. ramen. I remember this.
Yes.
It was the only hot thing that we could make.
And we both sit down after that, and we didn't want to make a sound because it was so loud. And so Nate's like to my right, like maybe 10 yards or something. And I remember I'm puffed up, and I sit down, and I'm just like leaning up against my pack, and I'm just like not moving. The only thing I'm doing is my eyes are moving, like scanning the clear cut. Because 1, I'm so cold, like I don't want to move. And 2, like I don't want to make any movement because we're so close. And I remember like an hour of that goes in where Nate and I are just sitting there. We haven't seen anything. Like we haven't seen a deer. We haven't seen nothing. And I look at Nate, and he looks at me, and I'm like, all right, screw this. We're going to start a fire. So luckily right next to me, there's this super old stump. And it's probably only protruding from the ground about, I don't know, maybe 2 feet. And it's maybe about, I don't know, maybe this table wide, maybe like 2 feet diameter.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, Nate, we're gonna warm up. And so what you do is when you find a stump like that, you find some sticks, some twigs, and you start the fire right in the middle of the tree trunk. And then as it burns, it burns the stump with it. So it's like you have this constant fuel, like you were saying, of just wood constantly putting on top. Mm. Now, you still have to stack wood on top to make the flames go alive, but basically what the stump does is it creates a funnel for the coals where it just doesn't sink out to like snow or wet ground where it burns out. So basically, we got this giant fire to go, and I was like, man, this is awesome. Like, I'm warm. I can feel my fingers again. And, you know, as we're doing this, like, we're obviously, like, keeping eyes out on the clear cuts. And so now, again, we're on the far right side. We're looking at the close or the middle ridge, and then there's a super far ridge to our left now that we can't see from the previous position from the left or our original glassing point. And again, you have to understand there's like 3 feet of snow, so everything's essentially whited out. And 2022, that's like Nate and my second year hunting together. And up until then, anytime I spotted a deer, I've been pretty mild. Like, I'll be like, hey, I got a deer or something. And I remember, like, I still remember this so clearly. I pick up a stick, I stoke it in the fire, and I turn back up and I look at the far ridge, and there's a road that you can see, which has how the indents work. And up on top of that road, there's a huge snow embankment where it's just white. Mm-hmm. And I've been looking at that for like a past hour 30. And so, like, once you look at something for an hour 30, you know what's there or what's been there and what's new. I remember I turn up there and clear eye, I'm like, dude, there's 2 dots up against that white embankment. And I'm like, I know for a fact those weren't there earlier. So I'm like, oh, it might be a deer. I throw the binos up, and the only thing I see is racks. I just see 2 racks. I throw my binos down, and I jump over the fire. Because as I'm jumping over the fire, like, I'm going to my pack because my pack's on the other side of the fire at this point. And so I'm going for my spotter. And as I'm doing that, Nate's like, what are you doing? I was like, big bucks, get your spotter. And Nate's like not even doing anything. He's like looking at me like, what are you doing? I'm like, dude, big bucks, like, get your spotter. They're right up there on that road. Sure enough, get the spotter on them. And lo and behold, there's Octo and his buddy Deca. Just a giant in quotations. There's a 4x4, typical 4x4, and a typical 5x5. And they're like sparring with each other.
Mm-hmm. And they weren't like fighting, sparring. They were just kind of standing there in the cold on this middle of this first kind of sunny hillside, probably trying to warm up and then kind of just playing with each other a little bit of sparring, but not full rut, just going at it.
Which is this is one of the points we want to make. Like, you would think in November, especially this late, that 2 bucks of that caliber would be hating each other.
Yeah.
But yeah, here they are, just kind of like,
almost like you'll see bucks
in September.
interact in September,
Yeah.
right after they shed their velvet.
Like, you could tell when we looked at them, like, these are friends, not enemies, which they should be enemies in November. And so we get the spot on them, and we are just freaking out.
Yeah.
And at this point, again, there's two great bucks. We've got one tag. So I'm like, Nate, which one are you going to shoot? And Nate's like, are you kidding me? The 4-point. Yeah. And so they're about 900 yards from us.
Hence the name of this basin, the 900.
Yeah, exactly. So that's where the name 900 came from, is because when we spotted these bucks, they were 930 yards. I still remember when I ranged at 930 yards. And basically, now we're just kind of like observing these two deer, because we're like, we don't know where the deer are going to be. Like, we don't know how to get there. Because at this time, Nate was hunting with his Savage Axis 308 Winchester. And he's single feeding this gun. And so I'm like, we essentially have one shot. And at this time, Nate's shot far before, but like, he's nowhere where he is today. Like, we have just made leaps and bounds with, our shooting capabilities and whatnot. It's not to say that we haven't done it back then, but, it's just like when you reflect, back in the past, it's like, you're obviously going to be better now, right? But at that time, we were as good as we were going to get.
Yeah.
And so, long story short, I'm like, I just made this firework, and it took forever to do it. But I could tell, like, Nate was getting antsy. And so Nate's like, hey, let's just get up to this middle ridge and see if we can't just, get close enough, essentially, and just try to pull a shot off. So
off we went, and Samong was looking longingly over his shoulder at the fire. But I was plenty warm with the adrenaline.
Dude, I remember. So when we went from the right, which is where we were originally glassing, we had to cross a creek to get to the middle ridge. We got down there, and there was one point where I sank to my waist with the snow.
Yeah, it was deep in the bottom.
I was like, what in the world is this?
What are we doing?
Luckily, I was following Nate, who was making a trail, and so I was just trying to pace behind Nate.
Yeah, and so the bucks are in this far basin, kind of on the side of the ridge facing us of the far ridge. And so we have this middle ridge that on Onyx, it seemed like we could get anywhere between like 300 to 500 yards, depending on the snow and the angle and the trees and stuff. We weren't quite sure, but we were going to try it out. So what we did is we went down from our glassing knob, crossed this creek area, really deep snow, and then we started working up the middle ridge just on the side away from the deer, so that we were hoping that any noise we made, obviously our visual, wearing overly, dark clothes in snow, we weren't wearing snow camo or anything like that. We were two black dots on a hillside. We were hoping that those things wouldn't spook the deer. And so it was a bit of a climb up this hill, especially in the deep snow. I just remember my heart just going crazy.
Yeah, because this is clear cut, and like, dude, those logs create giant holes, and like sometimes when the snow's so deep, you don't know where you're stepping into.
It's almost like walking in a boulder field, or a snowed over boulder field, where you take a step and you sink all the way down to your hip, and it's just pretty treacherous. And so we're slowly working our way up, and there was like 2 times where I peek, I creep over and peek over the corner of the ridge up to that far ridge, and they're still just standing there. Because when we decided to move, it was after, like, it didn't really look like they had a destination in mind. They weren't headed straight to bed. They weren't running around rutting. They were kind of just standing there for most of the time that we watched them, which was probably only like 15, 20 minutes. And so as we worked our way up this ridge, and I popped over a couple times, they were both still just standing there, exact same position. So then finally, are like, okay, put our head down, crank up the rest of this ridge, probably had half the ridge left, and we kind of worked up into the woods at the top of the ridge before we came and popped out to our shooting position. Because at the top of this ridge, it kind of almost flattens out at the bowl between that middle ridge and the right ridge, which we had been glassing in thick timber. And so what we didn't want to do is go in the same basin as these 2 deer in the clear-cut snowy hillside. It was obviously going to bust them out. So we stayed on that far side of the ridge away from them, worked our way up into the timber, and then once we got into a spot where we thought we were in a pretty good shooting distance from these deer, we pop out right to the edge of the timber. And we do that really slow. We kind of just step right out of the timber and set down.
And voila, the deer are gone.
Voila, the deer are gone. Absolutely nowhere to be found. And we're like, it could not have been more than probably 10, 15 minutes since we had last seen them working in the same spot.
If even.
It was not very long.
I mean, from when I first spotted them to when you last laid eyes on them, it's probably 45 minutes of these two bucks just standing there.
Yeah.
Right? And then as soon as you're in position, gone.
Yeah. Which, is Murphy's Law, how it happens. Well, that was not all Murphy showed his face that day, though. But we pop out. We kind of just sit down right at the timber's edge. We try not to move as little as possible. We do some first scanning, and then Samong is like, okay, well, if we're going to take a shot, we need to, if something shows up, we need to be ready to shoot, or you need to be ready to shoot. So let's find that. So we creep forward another maybe 5-10 yards to this tree. And to the right of the tree, there was more branches up above. So it was sheltered from the snow. So there was just less snow to dig out. And so I was able to kind of dig out a little spot, lay my pad down, and find a spot that I could lay prone and line up where these deer last had been.
Yeah, and so where we are now, relative to where we last saw the bucks, this is like 300 yards.
Yeah, it was about 300 yards, which was, we were like, man, this is perfect position. The only problem is the deer aren't here.
Yep.
But if they pop back out, we're in great position. And so we lay there, and you're sitting behind the glass, and I'm kind of laying prone on my stomach, and I just remember I put a puffy on the ground. And the puffy slowly, as my body heat warmed up the ground, it slowly started to melt through. And I mean, within 30, 45 minutes, I was just like soaked through to the core. I remember my stomach just being numb. But we had been there maybe 30 minutes or so, and we're both glassing. And Samong's like, I got a buck. And I was like, oh, where at? Because nothing had changed. There was no deer walking on this hillside. Nothing had changed. Like, he's bedded. And so Samong walks me in, and sure enough, the 5x5, which was the one that had been with the typical 4x4 that we call Octo now,
which is the 5x5 is the smaller buck.
Is a smaller buck, but still a beautiful dark timber buck.
He's a great buck. He was smaller relative to Octo.
Yeah. And he's bedded right under this little pine tree. So he was bedded at 420, and at first pass, I'm like, this is great. I can maybe take a bedded shot. Looks like he's got all day. And so I start to key in more with my binos, and there's probably a 5-inch pine tree right in front of him from our angle that just goes perfectly up behind the crease in his shoulder.
Yep.
And I mean, you could not have painted a worse position for a tree.
So again, we have now located this 5x5, right? But still in the back of our mind, we're like, where's the 4x4?
Yeah.
So basically what we're looking at is we're now from our shooting position, we're looking at this open ridge that's a clear cut, and there's a road that just cuts right in the middle of it. And that road comes from our gut, from our right, it comes up to that point, and then it dips to the backside where we cannot see into another gut. They were on the point on that road when we first spotted them. Yeah. This buck is now maybe 150 yards to the top right up off the road. And so to this day, we don't know where the 4-point went. We just assumed that he just kept on taking that road to the backside where it's timbered up, and that's where he went.
Yeah, whether he heard us or not, we'll never know.
But regardless, in the moment, Nate was like, I don't really care which one I shoot. Like, they're both solid deer. So I'm like, all right, we'll try to kill this bedded 5-point.
Yeah. And so at this point, it was about 11 a.m., maybe just a little bit after 11 a.m. And we're like, we got him bedded. He's going to stand up any minute, and I'm going to shoot him. So I get my dope dialed to 420, and we proceed to lay there and sit there.
And this is the aspect I hate about filming hunts. Is people will watch that film. This hunt is live on my channel. What people saw is cutscenes. They saw, oh, there's a buck bedded, and then the next thing they know, oh, the buck got up.
Yeah.
These were the most grueling, freezing, cold, miserable 3.5 hours of my hunting career. It was
almost
gnarly.
4 hours of laying there, and I laid prone for most of the time, and Samong was sitting. And Samong mentioned this, I think, in the early season deer episode. It was a quiet day. It was not a windy day, and there was this crunch on the snow like we have talked about multiple times. And even though this deer was 420 yards away, every little movement that we would make, he'd be asleep, eyes closed, asleep, kind of basking in the sun. And we'd like, I'd adjust from prone to like maybe put a little bit more pressure from one hip to the other, and it would make a little crunch in the snow, and his eyes would pop open. He would look in our direction.
Yeah.
He never got like nervous, like twitchy or standing up.
No, but he heard.
But he heard every little thing. And so we were very hesitant to make any big move. We obviously weren't going to start a fire. We weren't going to pull, a bunch of jackets out of our bag or anything like that.
Yep.
And so because of that, it made these 3.5, almost 4 hours just grueling.
And the craziest part is this buck where he was bedded never got hit by the sun.
Yeah.
And I was like, this buck is so content in the shade when it's like 5 degrees out, and it didn't bother him at all.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, that's a testament to just how thick these deer's coats are.
Yeah.
We are over here literally basking in the sun, and we're still freezing.
Yeah. Yeah, it was not pleasant.
But yes, to add to that, some people in that film, I remember they asked, like, why didn't you guys just move over there and shoot him when he was bedded? And I'm like, see, like, that's the thing that people don't understand, right? In the film, it seems so simple. Oh, move 20 yards to the right so that tree's not blocking his vitals. But in the moment, it's like, you can't move.
And in retrospect, that buck was bedded there the whole time that we had come out, and we were incredibly lucky that he didn't bust out when we came from the timber and got initially set up. He must have been wary. He must have been, watching in our direction.
But in our defense, like, we did do a very good job approaching that side. When we didn't just like run out there.
No,
we really meticulously like kind of made our route, and like, dude, I remember we were like, every time we picked up our foot, we were like slowly crunching down on the snow.
Yeah, and so here we are, 3.5 hours in late season, so we're in November. The days are short. 3.5 hours takes us from about 11:30 to like 4, and like getting to the point where we're wondering how much light is going to be left when this buck stands, if the buck stands, and kind of going through all the ideas and antics that if you've ever been sitting waiting for an animal to move that you go through. Do we try to get it to stand? Do all this? But in the meantime, what had happened is the sun had started to go behind the hill opposite of us, behind where the buck was bedded. And the sun was directly in our optics.
Yep.
So you could barely film the deer with the glare. I could barely see him through the rifle scope. And sure enough, with the sun right there, we're sitting there, and I had dialed my dope for 420, back at the beginning of this time. Samong's watching, he's like, oh, he's about to stand. And so I lay down prone. Sure enough, the buck kind of reaches back with its head, licks its hind quarter, and then stands up. It stretches. We're thinking, okay, he's going to just kind of be moseying around. And he gets up and he just starts walking and not stopping.
And this was a conversation that we had where Nate was like, I'm scared that he gets up and he just walks off. And I was like, he's probably not going to do that. He's probably going to stretch and like,
he's going to stretch and mosey around. So he did stand up and he stretched, but he still stood up and stretched with that little 5-inch pine tree directly in front of him. But then after he took that first step forward,
he was gone.
He was just walking. And he wasn't trotting or spooked or anything. He was just moving like he had a purpose of going somewhere. He was done bedding. He was ready to move to the next spot. And so, as Samong's ranging him, I'm kind of dialing up my dope. And he stops at 450, and he stopped at 450, and I have my dope, I have my turret dialed, and I squeeze off the shot. And in the video, I just remember, because with the sun, and you could even see it in person, with the farther distance and the cold weather and the sun, you could see the reflection, the sun glinting off the bullet.
Yeah, you can see the actual bullet.
The actual bullet. It was like a laser. You could see the light go across the canyon, and it just went poof
next to his hoof,
into the snow down next to his hoof. He jumped and he ran off to the right a little bit, and then he kind of stopped and started walking again and started turning back around to his left. And I was like, what the heck happened? Mm-hmm. Like, I was like 4 feet off. And so Samong pulls out his ballistics app on his phone, dials in a quick couple numbers. He's like, here, this is your next dope. And so he pulled up the dope chart, and the second shot was at 5:02. The second shot opportunity that he gave us was 5:02, which, looking back, being the hunter I am now, that was not a shot I was prepared for. It's not a shot that I should have taken. However, I did at the time, and so I dialed into 5:02. But in my mind, I was like, man, that last one was so low. I'm going to hold just right above his back.
Mm-hmm.
And I squeeze off the shot. It feels great. And it goes like literally, you can watch the video. There's a frame that you can pause where you can see the hair on the top of his back, right above his shoulder, in a little crescent.
Yeah, it splits it.
It splits. It just brushes the hair on his back right where I was aiming. And that second shot, it was a miracle that he even gave it to us, but that was all he needed. He jumped and ran, up over this saddle, out of the basin, out of our lives.
In the moment, it's like, we get a lot of but in the moment, it's like, it's so different than watching it on screen, right? You're not full of adrenaline, right? Because again, that first shot, when it went off, I was like, I'm thinking this deer is going to be rolling down the hill. Mm-hmm. But when I saw where it hit, I'm like, okay, something is something is so off, because I've seen Nate shoot, and I have never seen Nate be that far off from a target, right? Like, we're literally talking about like another deer lower from where you hit. Mm-hmm. And so my first reaction was like, I know Nate shot his rifle, but I was like, now I need to go and do my own calculations to actually even confirm his dope, because now I'm second guessing his dope chart. And sure enough, I get there, and our dope chart was pretty much the same. I think it was like 0.25 MOA off.
Yeah.
And
so I don't know what happened with that. I mean, I still think about it to this day, but I would think it was probably a mix of laying there for so many hours, being so cold, having it be such a cold bore shot.
Yeah.
And probably just a really poor shot in general, which they happen. Maybe a different podcast down the road if we talk about shooting and learning under pressure, but this single hunt, this event, those two shots were the nexus for a change in my shot preparedness going forward, going up until nowadays. So, I mean, I may or may not have been the last time I ever shot that rifle because I was frustrated. However, shot preparedness and practice and all the things that go along with shooting well and accurately and reliably. Although I hadn't had issues up to that point, I had shot my bear that fall, or the prior fall, and I had shot my deer the prior fall, both with one shot, well. But that really put a fire in my bonnet to make sure that I had everything dialed. That is a side note. We stand there, we review the footage. It was really obvious it was a miss. I mean, there was absolutely no question whether this was a bad hit or a miss. You could see the snow impacts on both. You could see the first one was just so obviously a miss. And so we stand there and we kind of sit and contemplate the day until, it's kind of getting close to dark, and then we start from what was from there quite a pack out. Well, not a pack out, quite a walk of shame, out in the dark.
Yeah, and just to add on, after the second shot and that buck took it, I mean, we watched that buck run across that hillside. I mean, he covered about 800 yards just moving. And I was just like, as the spotter in that situation, I feel like sometimes people don't give the spotter enough credit. And I'm not saying that to my own horn. I give all my spotters credit, but they really are the one that essentially coordinates everything, right? Some people even got mad at me in that video for saying I was yelling at Nate. I'm like, dude, I was so calm. I was just like, oh, you missed. But basically what happened is the first shot, I clearly told Nate, I was like, dude, you're way low. You didn't even hit the deer. The second shot, I was like, you hit closer to the deer, but I can tell he's not hit. But then obviously you don't actually know. Mm-hmm. So I literally stayed on the deer with the actual cameras, watching this deer just kind of run and trot all the way until he crushed over to the backside. Mm-hmm. And that's when I told Nate, I was like, dude, if you hit him fatally, there's no way he would have escaped this entire clear cut. If he was hit, like a bad hit, there's no way he would have ran how he did. He was just you could tell he was healthy running.
Oh yeah.
He wasn't limping, or he wasn't sick or anything. He was just
uphill as well.
Yeah, he was running, and he would occasionally stop and look back, what
happened?
What was that? That was weird. And then he kind of just kept going and then disappeared. And that was the last time we ever saw him. And then in the situation, like I didn't really say anything because I was like, Nate knows, Nate knows what he knows now. Like I don't have to say anything to him. And then, yeah, it was quite the walk
Yeah.
back to the truck.
Yeah, it was a sobering evening, and it was a nexus for change in my preparedness with shooting, and it was also the birthplace of Octo in our chase of Octo over the last, what this year will be 4 years, which he is still alive and well, as I know off of my trail cams, that probably either 6.5 or 7.5 years old this year. However, that is a story of a late season whitetail hunt. With a lot of the factors that we told that just because that has a lot of factors that are pretty signature of late season whitetail hunting, whether you like them or not. The weather, the deer movement, that kind of X factor of you never know what's going to show up, how we plan stalks with the snow, kind of all these things wrapped up into one hunt. So what we're going to do now is we're going to break down a few of the things that we mentioned during the hunt, but just kind of talk about them in an order.
So the first one, obviously, is you just, before you even go on a hunt, you have to be able to at least have a general idea of what you can expect from a hunt. So one of the things that we really want to touch on, and we feel like it's most important, is what Nate's referring to is as the X factor. This is the time of year where a lot of the bucks, and not just bucks, big mature bucks, are out from their hidey holes, and they're oftentimes daylighting when you can actually hunt and shoot them, and they're often covering a lot more ground outside of their home range. Now, you might have some bucks that typically stay within a home range, and they really hone in on those specific herds of does, but you do have some bucks where they start venturing out. One of the prime examples is I have this area where I left my trail cam soaking over the winter, this past winter. And that spot right there, if you set that up in September, you'd be like, this is a terrible spot. No sign, no nothing. First week of November rolls around, and there are mega bucks just cruising across that trail cam. Why? Because they're searching. So this is one of the things that I actually recommend people doing. If you actually want to learn one specific area well, set up a trail cam like the last week of October, because that is oftentimes when you're going to get the most activity of the big mature bucks showing themselves because they're cruising.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the intel I get from trail cams is from that first week of November, having a trail cam soaking year round and year out. And I have some masher bucks just.
Well, and I'll even give a testament to that with this exact same basin in the 900. I kind of went all in on finding this deer and learning his pattern after that year. I had up to 6 cameras in that basin, all in different spots. And throughout the summer, I got photos of him on one of those 6 cameras. That camera was about 150 yards away from another camera, and that other camera never saw him. He never passed that ridge, even though that other camera that he was never on was on a much more popular travel corridor, on a much more sensical travel corridor. If you're hiking around scouting and you're like, man, this looks like a good place for animal movement, he was never there. The only time he showed up on the other cameras was from about October 30th to December 10th during that rutting time frame. If I didn't have that one camera and find out where his hidey hole was that summer, you would have never known that animal existed until that rut time frame when he opened up. He started coming out in the daytime in more open, more maybe common areas that you would see.
Yep. And so that's why we call it the X factor, because you just don't know what's going to walk up in front of your glass. That is why we love November. It's so volatile. Mm-hmm. You might find a little spike. You might find the biggest buck of your life. I guess that is the biggest point, if there's such a thing as a brownie point here, that we give to November, is because this is often when these big bucks are up off the ground and they're moving and they're not nocturnal. So what does that mean for you as the hunter? It means that your odds of shooting a big buck go that much higher, mm-hmm. because they're willing to show themselves. Yeah. In my personal experience, my biggest whitetails have come out of the late season. That's not to say that we haven't shot great bucks. Like my family hasn't shot great bucks in October. I mean, we've killed great bucks in both seasons, but it's the deer themselves are 2 completely different animals. Mm-hmm. October, early season, skinny, very thin haired, and late season.
Pretty whitetail deer.
Yeah. Late season, man,
They
like
could be
just
brutes.
rutted up, thick necks, swollen. They just look like a completely different animal, which is funner sometimes when you glass up a animal and you're just like, dude, that thing's body is huge, right? It gets you excited like that. But really, that's the main thing. But now I want to touch on some of the things as to how you can actually find success out there, because now we know the reason why you want to do it or why you should do it or the main attraction to hunting in November. But it's like, okay, now how do you actually go about it? So for a lot of people, you know, including myself up until recent years, like I never really scouted to go after one particular deer. Like, for example, like Nate here, like he's been after this one single deer for multiple years. But for the average guy out there, myself included, we kind of just go out there and you kind of just get, or you take what you get. You might go out there, you might see a little, you know, basket rack 4-point or something, and you'd be happy to take them, right? The main thing that Nate and I do is we get to a certain spot where we feel like a buck might call this home or might be using that area right then and there or during that season. After that, because whitetails are naturally skittish and they will run into the next basin or the next county over if you spook them, we try to minimize our presence as much as possible. Now, it sounds very counterintuitive. That's something that you should do with everything. But when it comes to whitetails, I feel like we take that with a lot more emphasis and a lot more significance of being like extra cautious, extra quiet, because they're simply more skittish. So Nate, what we do, kind of like how we, you know, told the story about Mini Houdini, is like we just get up high where you can oversee a little basin or wherever you want to hunt, but you're also far enough where you're not immediately spooking anything that might be there right then and there. Now, you don't want to be so far away where if you see something, you can't make a play. It has to be, there's a balance between there. But the first thing that Nate and I do in this season is we typically like to hunt spawn stock. So we like to glass a lot of clear cuts. Now, the advantage of that is, yes, if you spot an animal, a lot of times it gives you the advantage because the deer have no idea you are there. It gives you ample time to make a game plan, an effective game plan, to close the distance and execute a shot on that animal. Some of the other methods that might not be super popular with rifle hunting, more so with bow hunting, is just sitting on a tree stand, sitting on a game trail or something. Because when you're in close quarters like that, especially with the bow, glassing up a deer at 600 yards isn't really something you're going to do because spawn stock whitetails is extremely hard. So some people will sit on game trails. And I know that we have a late archery general season here where a lot of people kill some masher bucks because they just sit on these game trails and these bucks are daylighting. With the rifle, you can absolutely do that. The problem with sitting in a timber is you oftentimes you see like 100 yards versus you can sit on a clear cut. You can see sometimes miles of a lot of country. So there's really not one way to go about it, but Nate and I, we really like the glass open country. If it's too far, we spot something out of range, make a game plan, and then go from there.
And for us, that is also just a big portion of it. It's how we enjoy to hunt. It may be less sure it's been successful for us, but it's been successful because that's what we spend our time doing. I don't spend much time hunting from a tree stand. I've never hunted from a tree stand with a rifle. And I don't usually spend much time sitting in like that closer quarter timber unless it's because of weather or visibility or something else like that. How I enjoy hunting is I enjoy spot and stalk. So because our success comes from that big part, because that's how we spend our time. Not to say other ways aren't successful, like you're saying. People are absolutely plenty successful with those other tactics, and that's because they're spending time doing those.
Yeah. So that's the first thing we go about a late season hunt. That's typically what we do. Whenever we get on onX, really the first thing, or maybe sometimes the only thing we're trying to look for is a glassing point. But some of the methods that I have killed whitetails in the past, and my family has done, is we kind of take it one step back instead of overlooking a giant basin. Now you kind of just hone in on one spot, and you kind of just throw all your eggs into that basket. So it's like, if they come into that spot, cool, you get a shot. If they don't, you're going home empty-handed, right? It's a gamble. So one of the methods that my uncle loves to do is he goes and he sits on the edge of these clear cuts. He likes to hunt these transition zones when they're going from the timber to a clear cut or vice versa, or sometimes they're just on a trail.
Mm-hmm.
My uncle loves hunting that because a lot of times you're hunting in close quarters and you're usually hunting within 200 yards. Within 200 yards with a rifle, what does that mean? That means if a buck shows himself, all you have to do, take the safety off, shoot the deer. There's no game planning involved. There's no, oh, how do we get there involved? It's just point and shoot pretty much at that point. And it's something that tactic has served my uncle very, very well. He's like one of the most consistent whitetail killers in the family because he has the patience to sit there.
Yeah.
And I can sit there too, but sometimes I'm just like, I have this thing in the back of my mind where I'm like, what if I was over there and there's something there right now, but I can't see it?
Mm-hmm.
So I have these thoughts, I have these battles or these demons, if you will, that come up in my mind. And I just feel like I'm FOMO in a way, right? Like I feel like I'm missing out if I don't see everything. Like I want to see everything. But my uncle, he's so like, no, if they come here, I take it. And he's killed some great bucks doing that. That is one way you can do it. The other way to do it is still hunting. Now, we touched it in October, but still hunting is not something I really recommend for whitetail because, again, they're very skittish. It's hard for you to oftentimes walk up on a whitetail buck without him spooking. Now, that doesn't mean that it can't be said. There have been multiple opportunities in the past where, like, you turn a corner and you feel like you're walking so loud and the deer has no idea you're there.
Your Montana deer last year is a great example of that.
Yes. So I always touch on that too because like that's a prime example of what we're talking about here. So in Montana, you can hunt through the entire month of November. So it's a late general hunt. But the advantage with what my dad and we did last year is we were still hunting. We were just walking up on the road. The good thing was even though it had snowed, it was actually super warm for like the past 2 days. So all the snow was starting to melt. And what happens when the snow starts to melt is the snow is extremely soft and it actually works in your favor because now it just muffles all your footsteps. And so I remember I had spotted this doe down on the road below. She cut her way up to me. I had an idea that there might be a doe in the area, walked right on top of her, had this doe urinate right underneath me 30 yards, had no idea I was there. And this buck walks out 40 yards. I shoot the buck, just like had no idea. Close quarters. So it's not to say that timber hunting or still hunting does not work. There's a time and place for it because where I was hunting whitetail last year in 2024 in Montana, frankly, there was no such thing as glassing. If you were going to glass, you're glassing like 6 miles away across a giant river that you couldn't even get to anyway. So you were literally stuck to still hunting. So it's like, if you run into them, cool. If you don't, it's just part of the game plan. So depending on where you hunt, you might not get the opportunity to glass. That's why sometimes e-scouting comes into handy because sometimes like here in Northeast Washington, there are some units where you don't really get a glass. It's so thick. So Nate and I, what do? We kind of just avoid it. We go find somewhere where we can glass. That's not to say, here's a little secret information. Those dark timber whitetails, there are some mashers lurking around there because like I said, not many people want to be stuck seeing 100 yards.
Well, and that's also a reason why some of the biggest whitetail bucks in Washington come out of the late archery season.
Yep. Is
because with archery, since you're already confined to the range that you can shoot your bow within, so say with someone that's very skilled, say 50 yards, being generous from a tree stand, if you're hunting within a 50-yard radius, you get to hunt that timber during the rut, and that's when the big bucks a lot of times will come through during the daytime in that timber in those transition areas. Another thing I want to touch on is where to look for bucks during this time of the year. And this is something that is a little bit more of a gray zone with whitetail, because at least in this area of the state, we don't have the extreme elevation changes of mountains that a lot of the other states do. So let's take Montana or Wyoming for an example. You have, the mule deer up high in the mountains, and you have the whitetail down low in the agriculture and river valleys. In Washington, we have a much greater mixture of both whitetail and mule deer, but also the ranges of the bucks and the ranges of the does. But generally, what you will find throughout the summer and the early fall is you will find that the does hang out in a little bit lower elevation range, and the bucks hang out at the top. And for the top might only be 3,000, 4,000, maybe 5,000 feet in the area where it's the top of these ridges and these clear cuts. But the top of these hills or mountains or whatever is still the same elevation that they're doing clear cuts and stuff. It's not rocky elevation, it's timber up there. And so a lot of times the bucks will be up near the top, the does will be a little bit at the top, but mostly lower, and you kind of get this pie chart of this overlapping zone. And that's a great place to try to at least start during this time of the year for hunting. You'll see does, but you won't necessarily see just these massive pockets of does. They're more dispersed. As opposed to mule deer hunting, where a really popular rut tactic is going and just checking your nurseries or your pockets of does, just going from pocket to pocket to pocket, checking for does. You're gonna have a bit more of a gray area between the range of the does and the range of the bucks. But if you do approach a season where the general season does blend a little bit more into the rut, it is inevitable that those bucks, if they are higher up, will come down and cross over into those does area to try to breed a doe in heat. And it really only takes one doe in heat, in a whole basin to really bring the bucks out and into that area.
Yeah, and one thing I want to touch on is unless that doe is like in heat or extremely close to heat, these big mature bucks don't really hang out with that doe. Again, it varies in the situation, and I'm not saying that a big buck will never hang out with a doe. It happens. But according to some of what I've seen in the past, and just with trail cam scouting, you have this buck, many times, just a big mature buck, and he knows who's in the area. He knows all the does in the area. He knows all the bucks in the area. I mean, with all the bucks, he lived essentially with all these bucks in the summertime because they share a home range. But this buck, essentially what he's doing, he will often just go and check on does, kind of like what you were saying. So one thing is you don't always just want to count out, oh, this doe doesn't have a buck with her immediately, so I'm just going to go and try to find a doe that has a buck. Because you just don't know when that buck's going to roll through and check on that doe. I've seen some people where they get to hunt the actual rut, like in Idaho, for example. They've seen bucks actually breed doe and then they take them. Mm-hmm. Some people were just like, oh yeah, I was watching this doe for like 6 hours and then this buck finally showed up and then I shot him. Sometimes they're like, oh, I got there and the buck was already with the doe. So it's again, it goes back to that thing of you just don't really know. So you can't really count anything out, right? And so again, the tactic that Nate's kind of bringing up is kind of like where to start, right? But what I'm trying to say is you can start somewhere, but you can't really cross out options, right? Because you can be like, okay, well, I'm going to check this doe. He might not be there right then and there, but who's to say that he's never going to be there, right? So it's all about timing as well. But yes, to answer or to add on to Nate, it's like where the bucks summer, for example, or stay hidden during the early September or early October, usually it's not too far from where they do come up rutting. Because whitetails, again, they don't have a very big home range. They have anywhere from half square mile radius to about 3 miles. That's very average for a whitetail buck to spend essentially his whole life. Again, if the winters get super bad, it'll push them out of that sometimes. But as soon as they can get back in there, they're back in their home range. Yeah. So if you know of a big buck in one particular area and you know some of the does around, he might not be as far as you think. So don't count it out. One of the things I look for, especially when it comes to the big bucks, and it obviously depends on where you hunt, but if you have just a patch of dark timber surrounded by clear cuts, those are often where you want to go and look at because that's often where they're hiding. Very few times will a big buck actively spend his time in the clear cut. The clear cut's his feeding ground. Sometimes that's his rutting ground. But when he's just hiding, he's in the dark timber. Dark timber is your friend when it comes to finding big, mature whitetail bucks. I only know that because of my trail cams, and I don't see them in the clear cut. So I'm not necessarily speaking from personal experience, but I'm just saying more times than not, you're going to find more big buck activity in the dark timber where they know they're a little bit more hidden and a little bit more safe.
Yeah. Well, folks, hopefully that was an enjoyable podcast. Hopefully you found a little piece of information in there to take forward into this late hunt if you are doing it. we'll see what the weather holds. That's always kind of the factor you never know. So we could be in for a surprise, or who knows? It could be like 2 years ago and it could be 60 degrees and foggy. But with that said, we're going to move to our second little game that we play in this podcast, Fast Facts, which isn't really a game. It's just that we share an interesting fact with each other.
We just wanted to sound fancy, so we came up with the name of it.
Like always, if you guys have any trivia questions or facts that you think would be cool to share on this podcast, we would love to have them. You could message them to us, or you could email us at
triviaduel@syoutside.com. That is duel with D-U-E-L, not with an A, with an E. triviaduel@syoutside.com.
Alrighty, I'll hit you here. You ready?
Okay.
All right, bull moose. Now, this is a general bull moose, so I'm sure that this varies between Alaska and Shiras, being the two ends of the spectrum. But bull moose eat approximately 35 pounds in vegetation per day.
Jeez.
And in their antler growing season, which for moose is usually anywhere from about April-ish through the end of August, 25% of the nutrition that they gain from eating those 35 pounds around of vegetation goes to their antler growth.
Wow. I wonder if that percentage is the same for elk and deer.
I don't know.
I guess that's something that we got to save for next time. Oh, that's interesting.
That's a lot of leaves.
That's a lot of poor vegetation getting gobbled up by a moose. I was in Alaska earlier this year in August, and I almost hit a cow moose and her two calves on the highway.
Oh, they're big Alaska
And I'm
moose.
like, never once in my life have I ever driven and like I had to stop for a moose. In Alaska, you don't get deer doing that. You get moose doing that. And I'm like, that's a lot worse than the deer. Anyway, that's a good one. I'm going to stick to the topic of deer here. And this is actually a little bit longer of a fast fact because I just found it interesting. So this has to do with whitetail deer, and it has to do with giving birth. So this is a study that was done in Illinois with the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, so UIUC. So basically what they were doing is they wanted to see, well, at least my focal point here is I wanted to see out of all the does that were bred, how many had quadruplets, how many had triplets, how many had twins, how many had one single fawn, etc. Right? I just wanted to see the ratio.
Quadruplets is a thing?
Yes. So this is the crazy thing, right? So according to this research, and I think part of this was trying to CWD had to do something with it, but we don't really care about CWD. Like my focus here is how many animals or how many.
We care about it, just not in this context.
Yes, not in this fast fact. So this research happened over the course of 11 years. So from 2003 to 2013. Okay, so out of these, right? So there were 2,543 pregnant does that they were doing this research on, and this is basically the results that they found. So out of the 2,543 pregnant does, 533 of them were carrying one single fawn, which is 21%.
Okay.
1,796 of them were carrying twins, which is 71%.
Okay.
201 of them were carrying triplets, which is 8%.
Okay.
And then only one of them was carrying quadruplets, which made for 0.4%. So
that's wild. Quadruplets? That doe must have been huge.
There was one doe, but basically
overachiever.
Yeah, and another aspect of it that was very important was this. There were 2,543 pregnant does, but out of that, there were actually 3,884 does that were part of the research. So there was a good bit of them, a little over 1,000 that were not pregnant. So basically, here's the age group of how they were pregnant, right? So 20% of fawns, so like 6-7 month old fawns, 20% of all the fawns were pregnant. So most of the fawns were not pregnant. 78% of the 1.5-year-old does were pregnant. So leaves about 22% that were not pregnant. The does that were 2.5-year-old and older, 86% of them were pregnant. So 14
Wow.
of them were not pregnant. This study was very interesting.
That is very interesting.
Yeah. So
And back when, I don't know what podcast I had either a trivia duel or a fast fact about whitetail does breeding age, and they're usually very fertile from anywhere from 7-8 months all the way up to like 10.5 years.
yeah, and to add on to our topic here, man, this fast fact is just going. But sometimes you have these fawns that are born in May.
Mm-hmm.
So most of the fawns that get bred in the rut are usually the firstborns, where they're born like usually like in May, like really early May, and so they just get that 1 month ahead. But sometimes you have these fawns, these doe fawns that are born in like June, for example, and they will come into heat in like in December or January. So you will have what is called the second rut. On top of that, these late-born fawns, sometimes you have these mature does that just didn't get bred or they didn't get pregnant during the first rut, and they come back into estrus, and they get bred in December and January.
Because I might be wrong here, but if I'm not wrong, that does are each individual doe is very specific each year when she comes into heat, independent of a lot of things like weather and conditions and things like that. Like it's their time that they come in heat every year.
A doe knows herself.
Well, that was interesting. I liked that.
That was a great fast fact, if you ask me.
Hopefully you guys enjoyed joining this week, and we are off to do some hunting, but next week we will be joining you guys again. Until then, if you have photos of success, if you have stories of success, email us, send us a message. We love to hear about them.
Until then, see you next week, folks.